In last week's Parsha, the Torah had spoken about a shira, a song, that the song will be said to the Jewish people. What exactly a song, which song are we speaking about? This reading so the shira, meaning where the Jews are forewarned that if they transgress or they violate the Torah, there are going to be consequences. The way God created this world, we have nature, we have the natural order, and we have the spiritual order. God linked the spiritual order to the material order, to the natural order, meaning that heaven and earth is, which we live within that context. Meaning, if it doesn't rain, there's no bounty. If the earth itself is lacking in its capacity to give forth its yields, there are no yields. Man can't survive. If we fail spiritually speaking, does the earth function as it should function? Or do we say no? God links the two together. The material only functions, the natural only functions if we're in good standing in the spiritual realm. If we're not in good standing in the physical realm, then the natural order malfunctions. I'll give you an example. A non-Jew is only bound to the 7 Noahide laws. If he violates anything which is not one of the 7 Noahide laws, he thrives materially. And even if he violates the 7 Noahide laws, God doesn't reign in on him the way he reigns in on the Jew. Because the linkage between the physical and the spiritual are not linked in the same way. The Jew, one is dependent on the other. The equivalent is the person has to pay his electric bill to the electric company. What happens if he becomes delinquent? He doesn't pay. He doesn't pay. He gets a full warning. They warn him, and eventually they shut off the power. Because if you don't pay, the energy doesn't come through the system. God says, what allows the energy to come through the system that the natural order functions? If the Jew himself hones up and lives within the spiritual realm. But if the Jew lives as the physical person, not as the spiritual person, then the physical world malfunctions for the Jew. And then we have all kinds of very serious consequences. These are the liabilities. But who's going to attest to the fact that we've failed? Who are the witnesses? Heaven and earth are going to be the witnesses. They are the record. They are the witnesses. They are the testament. The fact is, we may believe that we're towing the line and doing the right thing and living up to our responsibility. But if the physical world, the natural order, doesn't respond as it should, that's clearly an indication that there's a problem. I'll give you an example. The Gemara tells us that if a person sees problems cropping up in his life, whether they're physical, whether they're emotional, mental, financial, whatever they may be, the Gemara tells us in Brachos, a person should introspect to try to understand why all of a sudden are all these issues coming about. That's what he should do. What about after he did the introspection and they persist? So seemingly there's a question, because we know the only time a person has physical material setbacks only because there's some kind of spiritual malfunction. So if the person introspects and he realizes everything is perfect, Why does it persist? Why did the problems continue? So the Gemara answers, he should attribute it to Bittul Torah. He should attribute the reason why he's still having all these issues in the material realm is because he's failed in the Torah realm. He hasn't studied sufficient. Meaning what he believed to be that he's sufficiently investing time to study Torah, he's not. So the famous question of the Vilna Gaon, why should you attribute it to Bittul Torah? To that he did not study sufficiently. That's why the problems persist. Maybe his audit wasn't accurate. It wasn't really an appropriate audit, because just as he missed on Torah study and he thought he had studied sufficiently, maybe he had missed on other areas. Maybe he didn't observe Shabbos correctly. Maybe in the laws of dietary, in that area, he had somehow failed. He fell short of what his responsibility would be. Why is it specifically Bittul Torah? Because if the audit was not accurate, why are we attributing the lack of accuracy to Bittul Torah, not to something else? That's the question which is asked by the Vilna Gaon. So my Rosh Hashiva Zech Tzarech Lebrocha would answer, we're speaking about a person, he does a very objective audit on himself, an introspection. And it's clear he did not violate the Shabbos. He did not compromise his dietary laws. However, when it comes to Torah, Torah is a very interesting area. What's considered Bittul Torah? What is it considered that you had no right to take off and not study? The person has to earn a living, a livelihood. The person has to sleep, the person has to eat, the person has to relax. This is all permitted. That time, although you're not studying Torah during that period of time, there's no claim against the person, because that's part of our function. Being physical beings, we have to address our physical needs. Therefore, there's no claim against the person. But what about if the person takes liberties and goes beyond what he truly needs? And instead of studying Torah, he does other things. Then there's a claim. But the times where a person himself needs an hour's worth of relaxation every day, so he should be able to maintain himself physically to accommodate the spiritual. It's permitted. What about a person normally takes an hour, but because now he's in good health, he only needs a half an hour, but he still takes the hour. So what he attributes to necessity may not be a necessity. So therefore, in this area, there's a certain inaccuracy, which you don't find in other areas. Regarding Shabbos, did you violate Shabbos? Did you not violate Shabbos? Is it kosher? Is it not kosher? Did it meet the standard? Did not meet the standard? But here, it's subject to so many variables, whether it is Bittul Torah, not Bittul Torah. So the person believes he did an accurate, responsible audit. But factually, if it persists, you attribute it to what? To Bittul Torah. So the Yisurim, the suffering, the problems, if they continue, that is the so-called, the built into the system to alert you that what you think is not. God created a system that heaven and earth, because we live within the physical existence, natural existence, if they begin malfunctioning, that tells us we're doing something not right. They are the witnesses. If the rain doesn't come, the bounty doesn't grow, and things go awry, that clearly speaks volumes that regardless of what you believe or we think, things are not correct, and you're off base. And as you say, you could fool yourself and delude yourself, but you have to deal with reality, and the reality speaks differently. Hazinu Hashemayim v'adabeiro. Hazinu, from the word ozen. Ozen means is the air. Heaven and earth, be attentive. V'sishma oretz imrefi. And listen to the words of my mouth. Let's take a look at Rashi. Hazinu Hashemayim sheni masra behem b'Yisrael. I'm forewarning the Jewish people. Shetvitiu edim bedover. You will be the witnesses. Shkach amarti lem shatem tiu edim. Chen sishma oretz. Lo meheyed bohem Hashemayim v'oretz. Why do we need heaven and earth to be the witnesses that the Jews violated? I'm a Moshe ani bosav Adam. I'm a mere mortal. L'mochani mes. Tomorrow I'm no longer here. Im Yom Rishon kibalno leinu abris. They'll say, why should we be held culpable? We never entered into a covenant with God. Mibo machishem. Who will contradict their position? Lefichach heir ben shamayim v'oretz. Therefore, Moshe says, heaven and earth will be the witnesses. I may not be here, but if heaven and earth don't respond as they respond to other nations of the world, that clearly says that there was a covenant, and because you violated the covenant, therefore the natural order doesn't function as it's meant to. But Eidim b'shem Makayom L'olam v'od Shem Yisku Yivo Eidim V'itnu Schoram. If they're meritorious, the witness will come and deliver the reward. Hagefen Tite Pirio, the vine will give its fruit, or its Tite Nishivula, the earth will give its bounty. V'Shemaim Yitnu Talom, and the dew will fall from heaven. The Mischaivu, however, if they're liable and culpable, Tia Bohem Yad Eidim Tchilo, the witnesses will be the first one to attest to the fact, to bring about that punishment. The heavens will withhold the rain, the earth will not give its bounty. Then, God forbid, will be removed and destroyed quickly through the nations. Now, there's the famous introduction to the Medrash in Eicho, which we read on Tisha B'Av, and the Medrash tells us that two of the great philosophers of the world, Gentiles, the nations of the world came to them and say, are we able to destroy the Jewish people? Are they vulnerable to us? Even though we were not a large number, are they vulnerable? So they said, check out the study halls and check out the synagogues. If you go to the Botei Medrash and you hear the sound of Torah, and you go to the synagogues where the children were educated, with the elementary school, and you hear the chirping of the young children, the Jews were not vulnerable. They have divine protection. But if you go and you hear silence, you don't hear the voice of Torah, and you don't hear the chirping of the children, they will be vulnerable. You could destroy them. Why? Because Yitzchak said to Yaakov, Akol kol Yaakov, vayadeh Esau. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. Meaning, the Medrash says, when the voice is the voice of Yaakov, what's the voice of Yaakov? That's Torah and Tefillah. When we study, we pray. Then the hands of Esau are restricted. Esau is incapacitated. But God forbid, if the kol is not kol Yaakov, if the voice is not the voice of Yaakov, then it's a Yidayim Esau. Then Esau is able to exercise his prowess and God forbid destroy us. That's what it's all about. So when Esau is able to come and bring destruction upon us, it's clearly there's a spiritual malfunction. The famous question years ago was the Holocaust. There were 1 million children, innocent children, who were murdered by the Nazis, genocide, unconscionable level of evil. Men, women, and children were just murdered, butchered, slaughtered with a passion, with a hate. Why did God allow it? How? How do we understand it? Well, we don't know exactly why. But we know that God doesn't allow this level of suffering to come upon us if we're thriving in the spiritual arena. No question. There must be some level of malfunction in the spiritual arena. Just as in the physical, we say there's, over time, there is things accumulate. And then it reaches a critical moment where everything just implodes identically based on communal responsibility, this is something which could have actually accumulated over centuries. As the Ramchal explains, that normally Satan is always prosecuting the Jewish people. Always. He always wants to audit our record, because our record is not perfect. Idsa Rachmim, the attitude of mercy, what does it provide? Hashem says, I don't want to hear from you. Even though the record's not perfect, I don't want to hear from you. The record should not be audited. But what happens if the record is so flawed and God cannot push away Satan any longer? As much as this Rachmim, it becomes so off-balanced, God allows Satan to prosecute the record. Because it's so overwhelmingly negative, Satan starts prosecuting. And the moment Satan prosecutes, God forbid, this is what we call Midas Adin. That's the attribute of justice. And he quotes the Zohar, the Ramchal, that the times where the Midas Adin becomes so overwhelming that people say, "Let's din v'les dayan." It looks as if, God forbid, there's no judge and there's no justice. Because as the people say, it doesn't make any sense. Because again, since we have no understanding how to make the assessment, the evaluation, why things have gotten so bad, therefore we say, "Let's din v'les dayan." The example I always give: a person takes a tiny pill of cyanide. The moment it touches his tongue, he dies instantaneously. Because if you understand how lethal that poison is, the body cannot deal with it. Therefore, a person expires almost instantaneously. But it doesn't make sense. What happened? Because if you understand the chemical makeup of that poison, you understand why the body cannot tolerate it. If we would understand the level of liability of spirituality, especially accumulating over time, and when it reaches that level, that critical mass of negative, the system cannot deal with it. And God created the world based on there is justice. There's rachmim, there's mercy, but there's justice. To just give away the store and let you go just rogue, God's not going to allow that. That's Midas Adin. So that things go well for maybe centuries, it's fine. But why things all of a sudden started to come apart at the seams? Evidently, something's not right. We have to start introspecting. Why the rains? Why do we have drought? Why do we have blight? Why do we have a lack of security? Why all of a sudden is anti-Semitism rearing its head, which for a while it was pretty quiet. Even presently, these are all indicators. They're indicators that the system is malfunctioning. Why? Evidently, the way we read the reality, the way God reads, it's different. As we say, as very often we say, there's more Torah being studied in the world today than ever. And yet, just in the past year in the United States, the incidents of anti-Semitism have been more than in years, multiples more. Why? Oh, look how observant Jews are. They're more observant than ever. Evidently, there is a problem. Where is the problem? I don't know where the problem, but one thing we all know, that each of us are not perfect. Our records are not perfect. So you can't lose by upgrading. So we have to introspect, especially now, during the Aser Simei Tshuva, which these are the days of penitence, which, as I mentioned, the Gemara tells us, the Navi says, Dirshu Hashem b'motzo kro b'yosakorov. You should seek out God when he's found and call him when he's close. The Rachmim during this period of time, there's no other time which is comparable to this time. And God accepts and embraces our tshuva, now more than ever. So again, we have to look for the indicators. We can't put a head in the sand and make believe nothing's happening. There's nothing which is going wrong. There's plenty going wrong. Whether it's the economy, whether it's the safety, the security, whatever it may be. It's not to be believed. So these are all red flags and alarms going off that we have to really hone up and put our house in order.